In the sweltering haze of a late summer afternoon in Eldridge Hollow, a forgotten speck of Georgia red clay where the air hung heavy with the scent of pine sap and unspoken grudges, 14-year-old Liana Brooks trudged along the cracked sidewalk of Main Street. Her sneakers, once white but now caked in the dust of endless miles, walked to and from the mill where her mama stitched uniforms for pennies, slapped rhythmically against the uneven pavement. Liana's skin, the deep mahogany of polished walnut, glistened under the relentless sun, and her braids, tied back with a frayed ribbon, swung like pendulums marking the slow bleed of another day in a town that had long ago decided she didn't belong. Eldridge Hollow wasn't kind to folks like Liana. The whispers followed her like shadows. "That Brooks girl, always begging for trouble," the white shopkeepers would mutter behind their counters, their eyes narrowing as she passed with her empty coin purse. It had been that way since she was knee-high, since the day her daddy vanished into the night, leaving behind rumors of debts unpaid and a family marked for scorn. School was no refuge. Teachers averted their gazes during roll call, and the lunchroom divided itself along invisible lines, Liana's tray forever isolated on the edge of a table that no one else dared share. But today, something stirred in the air thicker than the humidity, a faint tremor of change, disguised as an ordinary act of mercy. Ahead, at the busiest intersection where the old railroad tracks bisected the road like a scar from a bygone war, stood Mr. Harlan Whitaker. He was a specter of a man, bent and frail, his overalls threadbare and his hat perched low over eyes milky with age. The light turned red, cars honking impatiently, but Harlan hesitated, one gnarled hand clutching a burlap sack of what looked like wilted greens from his so-called garden. Drivers leaned on horns, their faces twisted in irritation, but no one stopped. No one ever did for strangers in Eldridge, especially not for those who looked like they carried the weight of too many yesterdays. Liana's heart quickened. She could hear the jeers already, the catcalls from the boys lounging on the corner stoop, the ones who spray-painted slurs on the side of her family's shack last spring. But something in Harlan's trembling stance pulled at her, a quiet desperation that mirrored her own. Without a second thought, she veered toward him, her small hand extending like a bridge across an abyss. As their fingers touched, the world seemed to pause, the honks fading into a distant roar. Little did Liana know, in that fleeting moment of compassion, she had just stepped into a storm that would unearth the rotting roots of Eldridge's deepest secrets. Secrets buried under layers of privilege and prejudice that had poisoned the soil for generations. What if one act of kindness could topple an empire built on hate? The light turned green, and with it, the unraveling began. Liana had learned early that kindness in Eldridge Hollow was a currency few could afford to spend, especially not a black girl scraping by on the fringes of a town that still whispered about the old days when cotton fields stretched like white waves under the whip's shadow. Her home was a sagging shotgun shack on the wrong side of the tracks, where the river mud seeped through the floorboards during rains, and the electricity flickered like a guilty conscience. Mama worked double shifts at the textile mill, her fingers calloused from years of feeding thread through machines that hummed the lullaby of exploitation. "Keep your head down, baby," she'd say, her voice weary as she collapsed into bed at dawn. "And remember, we don't owe them nothing but our survival." But Liana, with her wide brown eyes that saw too much and a spirit that refused to dim, couldn't help but lift her gaze. The town itself was a patchwork of faded glory, grand Victorian houses with peeling paint lining the hilltops, their porches guarded by rocking chairs where old white men swapped stories of better times. Down below, in the hollow where the Brooks family huddled, trailers rusted under kudzu vines, and the single grocery store jacked prices on wilted produce, knowing full well the bus to the city market didn't run on Sundays. Eldridge's history was etched into every corner, the Confederate statue in the square, moss-cloaked and defiant, the whites-only fountain long dry but never removed, the way jobs at the mill went to those with the right last names, while folks like Liana's neighbors picked up odd jobs scrubbing floors or mowing lawns for half the wage. It was a quiet racism, the kind that didn't need hoods or burning crosses anymore. It thrived in the averted eyes, the locked doors, the casual slurs tossed like cigarette butts into the gutter. Liana's days blurred into a rhythm of endurance. School in the mornings, where history lessons skipped over the lynchings that dotted the county records. Afternoons foraging for cans at the dump to sell for scrap. Evenings helping Mama sort through bills that multiplied like roaches in the walls. She dreamed of escape, maybe a scholarship to a college far away where the air didn't taste of resentment, but dreams were luxuries, and Liana had learned to ration them. That afternoon, as she cut through town toward the library's free books, the only place that didn't shoo her away, the sight of Harlan Whitaker snagged her like a thorn. He wasn't from the hilltops. His clothes spoke of the Hollow's own hardships, yet there was a dignity in his posture, a quiet defiance that echoed her own. As she guided him across the street, the world noticed. From the stoop, Tommy Hargrove and his pack of cronies erupted in laughter, their voices sharp as broken glass. "Look at that, the charity case playing Good Samaritan for some hobo." Tommy jeered, his face flushed from cheap beer smuggled from his daddy's garage. Cars slowed, windows rolling down to reveal scowls and mutters. "What are you doing, girl? He ain't worth the spit," the words landing like slaps. Harlan said nothing, his grip tightening on Liana's arm as if anchoring himself to her resolve. They reached the curb and he nodded once, his voice a rasp lost in the wind. But wait, no dialogues. So instead, his eyes held a gratitude that pierced her, a spark of something unspoken. Liana shrugged it off, waving him away toward the alley where he vanished like smoke. But as she continued home, the encounter lingered, a pebble in her shoe, stirring curiosity. Why had no one else helped? And why did Harlan's sack feel heavier than it should, as if it carried not just greens, but the weight of untold fortunes hidden beneath the town's facade of poverty? Little by little, the threads of Eldridge's tangled web began to pull taut, drawing Liana toward a truth that would force her to confront not just her own pain, but the systemic venom that had seeped into every vein of the community she called home. The days following Liana's chance encounter with Harlan Whitaker unfolded like the slow uncoiling of a spring, each moment building pressure until the air in Eldridge Hollow felt charged, ready to snap. Liana tried to shake it off, burying herself in the routine that had armored her against the town's barbs. But the whispers had started, slithering through the hollow like vines overtaking a fence. At school, during the monotonous drone of algebra where numbers offered the illusion of fairness, Jenny Mae Wilkins leaned over with a smirk that didn't reach her pale blue eyes. Jenny Mae was the queen bee of the white clique, her family owning the feed store that overcharged black farmers for seed that barely sprouted. "Heard you was playing hero for that old bum." "Liana, Daddy says types like him bring nothing but bad luck. Folks like us know better than to mix." The class tittered, a ripple of exclusion that Liana met with silence, her pencil scratching equations as if they could solve the ache in her chest. But inside, the seed of doubt took root. Why did kindness feel like a crime here? After school, the Hollow came alive with its daily injustices, a tapestry woven from threads of neglect and spite. Liana stopped by Miss Etta's corner store, the only place that sold day-old bread without questioning her mama's credit. Miss Etta, a stout black woman with silver streaks in her hair and a laugh that defied the gloom, slid the loaf across the counter with a wink. But as Liana counted out her nickels, the bell jingled, and in strode Mr. Hargrove, Tommy's father, his boots thudding like judgments. He bypassed the line entirely, slapping $1 on the counter for a pack of smokes, his eyes sliding over Liana as if she were a smudge on the floor. "Etta, you lettin' strays in here now? Town's going to hell with all this handouts." Miss Etta's jaw tightened, but she rang him up wordlessly, the air thickening with the unspoken war of endurance. Liana clutched her bread and slipped out, the door's chime mocking her retreat. These were the small cuts, the ones that bled slowly. The way the bank foreclosed on black-owned lots while extending loans to Hargroves' kin. The sheriff's patrol car lingering too long outside her shack at night, lights flashing accusations without cause. The clinic turning away fevers with no insurance excuses that never applied to the Hilltop families. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in bruises of orange and purple, Liana sat on the porch steps, her mama's old radio crackling with gospel tunes that promised deliverance. The help with Harlan replayed in her mind, his frail form leaning into her, the way the town's scorn had amplified in that moment. Curiosity gnawed at her. What was his story? Eldridge wasn't big. Everyone knew everyone's dirt. Yet Harlan was a ghost, mentioned only in passing as that crazy old coot squatting on worthless land. Driven by an impulse she couldn't name, Liana waited until Mama nodded off, then slipped into the night, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness like a defiant blade. The path to Harlan's place wound through the woods behind the tracks, where moonlight filtered through oaks draped in Spanish moss, the air alive with the chirp of crickets and the distant hoot of owls. She found his cabin tucked against a hillside, a ramshackle thing of weathered boards and tin roof patched with tarp. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the scent of cornbread and something earthier, like turned soil. Liana hesitated at the edge of the clearing, heart pounding against her ribs. What was she doing, trespassing into the unknown? But the pull was stronger than fear. Creeping closer, she peered through a grimy window, the glass fogged with breath. Inside, Harlan moved with surprising purpose, not the shuffle of infirmity but the deliberate grace of habit. He knelt by a scarred oak table, unfolding yellowed maps that sprawled like veins across the wood, maps marked with lines and notations, boundaries that snaked through Eldridge's heart. His hands, steady now, traced a path from the hollow to the fertile valleys beyond, where the town's richest acres lay. Liana's breath caught. Those lands belonged to the likes of the Hargroves, the Whitmans, families whose wealth was as old as the soil itself, built on the backs of ancestors whose labor they still claimed as divine right. As the night deepened, Liana's visits became a secret ritual, each one peeling back layers of Harlan's enigma. She never entered, never spoke, observing from the shadows, piecing together fragments like a quilt of revelations. One dusk, she watched him unearth a rusted strongbox from beneath the floorboards, its contents spilling forth in a cascade of deeds and ledgers. Paper brittle with age but inscribed with names that shocked her. Whitaker, not Hargrove, owning tracts that stretched to the river's bend. Harlan's eyes, sharp in the lamplight, scanned the documents with a mix of sorrow and fire, as if reliving battles long lost. Liana recalled the town lore, how Harlan had been a sharecropper's son, rising through grit to buy land in the 50s, only to face sabotage, fences cut, crops poisoned, threats scrawled on his door under cover of night. The KKK had marched once, torches flickering like accusations, forcing him to sell piecemeal to protect his family. But he hadn't sold everything. He'd hidden the core, deeding it in trusts obscured by aliases, waiting for a reckoning. The injustice burned in Liana's veins, hotter with each discovery. It mirrored her own life, the way her daddy's small plot had been eminent domain for a road that never came, leaving them landless. How Mama's wages stagnated while white workers climbed, the mill's owner citing market forces that magically favored one skin over another. Eldridge's racism wasn't explosive. It was erosion, steady and insidious, grinding down spirits until only husks remained. Liana began noticing patterns everywhere. The school board diverting funds from the Hollow's crumbling gym to the Hilltop's new pool, the way black businesses shuttered while white ones thrived on community support, loans denied to others. The casual segregation in church pews where hymns of equality rang hollow. Her anger simmered, a pot left too long on the stove, bubbling over in quiet rebellions, slipping extra food to Miss Etta's struggling patrons, tutoring the younger Hollow kids in defiance of curfews. But Harlan's secret amplified the stakes. One stormy evening, as thunder rattled the cabin's walls, Liana braved the downpour, drawn by a flicker of movement. Through the rain-streaked window she saw him poring over a recent notice. Eviction papers from the county, stamped with Hargroves' signature as proxy owner. The land Harlan guarded was under threat, bundled into a development scheme that would raise the Hollow for luxury homes, displacing families like hers without a whisper of consent. Liana's fists clenched, This was the climax of Eldridge's greed, a final erasure masked as progress. She wanted to burst in, to demand answers, but instinct held her back. Knowledge was power, but premature action was peril. As weeks blurred, the tension coiled tighter. Tommy and his crew escalated their taunts, cornering Liana after choir practice with shoves and slurs. "Think you're better, 'cause you pity the trash?" One night, they slashed her bike tires, spray painting "Stay in your lane" across the frame, a message laced with double meaning. Mama noticed the bruises blooming on Liana's arms, mistaking them for clumsiness, but Liana carried the weight alone, her resolve hardening like clay in the kiln. Harlan, too, seemed to sense the shifting winds. His nighttime vigils grew longer, maps annotated with fresh ink, as if charting a counter-offensive. Liana pieced it together. The old man wasn't frail by choice. His reclusiveness was armor, forged in fires of betrayal. The town had buried him alive, assuming poverty equaled defeat. But Harlan Whitaker held the keys to their kingdom. The original deeds proving Eldridge's elite had stolen his legacy through forged sales and coerced signatures, a chain of fraud stretching back to Reconstruction. The emotional stakes climbed, a ladder of heartache and hope. Liana dreamed of Harlan's youth, vignettes imagined from scraps, a boy tilling fields under the lash, growing into a man who outsmarted the system only to be dragged back by it. It echoed her own fears of becoming another ghost, her potential snuffed by the town's invisible noose. Friends in the Hollow, like little Jamal whose asthma went untreated because the clinic lost his paperwork, became mirrors of the broader wound. Liana's compassion, once a quiet flame, roared into purpose. She began sketching her own maps, tracing the fault lines of injustice from Harlan's window. But danger loomed. The Hargroves' eyes were everywhere, their influence a web that snared the unwary. One slip and Liana's world would crumble, her family evicted, her spirit broken. Yet the pull toward Harlan intensified, a magnetic force drawing her closer to the eye of the storm. Each step built the tension, layer upon layer, until the air hummed with impending rupture, the town's facade cracking under the pressure of truths too long suppressed. The rising action wasn't just events. It was the slow awakening of a girl to the machinery of oppression, her heart pounding in sync with the pulse of history demanding justice. The storm broke on a Friday night when the harvest moon hung bloated and accusatory over Eldridge Hollow, casting silver veins across the flooded fields. Liana had planned to stay hidden that evening, the rain earlier turning the paths to rivers of mud, but a guttural urgency clawed at her gut, a premonition woven from the frayed edges of her nerves. The Hargroves were holding court at the town hall, a community meeting disguised as concern over encroaching vagrancy, code for clearing out the Hollow's undesirables to make way for their land grab. Whispers had reached even Mama's ears. Harlan's cabin marked for demolition come dawn, his trespass the excuse to bury the past once and for all. Liana couldn't let it happen. Slipping from her bed, she pulled on her raincoat, the fabric slick and heavy, and ventured into the tempest, wind whipping her braids like vengeful spirits. The cabin loomed through the sheets of rain, its door ajar as if beckoning doom. Inside, shadows danced wildly from a single lantern, Harlan's form silhouetted against the wall, surrounded by his arsenal of papers. But he wasn't alone. Tommy Hargrove and two burly kin, faces twisted in predatory glee, had cornered him. They moved with the arrogance of entitled heirs, overturning the table in a crash of splintered wood, deeds scattering like fallen leaves. Harlan backed against the hearth, his frailty shed like a snakeskin, eyes blazing with the ferocity of a cornered lion. The intruders laughed, a guttural chorus that drowned the thunder, their boots grinding documents into the dirt floor. "Time's up, Whitaker. Grandpa should have finished you off back when you thought you could own what ain't yours." The air reeked of whiskey and wet wool, tension coiling to a knife's edge. Liana froze at the threshold, rain streaming down her face, heart slamming like a war drum. This was the apex, the raw nerve exposed, the culmination of generations' theft laid bare in a frenzy of destruction. She could flee, preserve her safety, But the sight ignited something primal. The echo of her daddy's lost land, Mama's bent back, the Hollow's collective sigh under the boot. With a cry swallowed by the gale, she lunged forward, slamming the door wide, the bang reverberating like a gunshot. The men whirled, shock rippling across their features, Tommy's sneer curdling to fury at the sight of her. "You? This ain't your fight, girl. Get out 'fore you regret it." But Liana stood firm, snatching a sheaf of deeds from the floor, clutching them to her chest like a shield. Harlan's gaze met hers, a silent pact forged in that instant, acknowledgment of the ally fate had delivered. Chaos erupted. Tommy lunged, his fist grazing Liana's shoulder as she dodged, the impact sending her sprawling into the mud-slick floor. Pain bloomed hot and fierce, but adrenaline surged, propelling her to her feet. She hurled the lantern, glass shattering in a bloom of flame that licked at the curtains, forcing the men back in a haze of smoke and curses. Harlan seized the moment, grabbing a hidden poker from the hearth and swinging it with the strength of buried rage, connecting with a thug's knee in a sickening crack. The room devolved into a maelstrom. Fists flying, furniture shattering, rain invading through the breached door to mingle with blood and ink. Liana scrambled for the maps, stuffing them into her coat, her fingers trembling but resolute. A boot caught her ribs, expelling air in a whoosh, visions of surrender flashing. The hollow burning, her family scattered, the truth ashes. But Harlan's roar, wordless, primal, reignited her. She kicked out, connecting with Tommy's shin, buying seconds to drag the old man toward the back window. Outside, the storm raged in sympathy, lightning fracturing the sky to illuminate the melee spilling into the yard. The Hargroves pursued, but the slick earth betrayed them, one slipping into a ditch with a howl. Liana and Harlan fled into the woods, branches clawing like skeletal hands, the deeds a sodden weight against her heart. Behind, flames devoured the cabin, a pyre for the old lies, sirens wailing in the distance as Eldridge's facade ignited. This was the peak, the shattering, the moment injustice's armor cracked under the hammer of defiance, leaving Liana breathless, battered but unbreakable, the weight of revelation propelling her forward into the unknown dawn. In the aftermath, Eldridge Hollow awoke to a reckoning as inevitable as the sunrise, the acrid smoke from Harlan's cabin curling like a question mark over the rooftops. Liana and Harlan had stumbled through the woods to Miss Etta's back porch, the deeds miraculously intact despite the deluge, their story spilling out in gasps between shivers. Miss Etta, eyes wide with the fire of long-suppressed fury, barricaded the door and phoned the one ally the Hollow trusted, Reverend Josiah, a civil rights veteran whose church basement hid more secrets than pews held prayers. By morning, the town buzzed with fragments. Fire at the old squatter's place, Hargrove boys nursing wounds and egos, a black girl seen fleeing with stolen papers. But the tide had turned. The deeds, when spread on Reverend Josiah's scarred oak table, were dynamite, each signature a forgery, each boundary a theft substantiated by faded affidavits and witness notes Harlan had preserved like holy relics. The resolution unfolded not in courts of law, where Eldridge's judges wore the same club ties as the perpetrators, but in the court of community, where truths multiplied like sparks on dry tinder. Liana emerged as the unlikely herald, her voice, once silenced, now steady as she recounted the night's terror to a growing circle in the churchyard. No longer the poor girl pitied or scorned, she stood tall, braids drying in the sun, the bruises on her skin badges of battles shared. Harlan, propped in a chair with blankets from Mama's mending pile, filled in the gaps. His grandfather, emancipated but chained by debt peonage, had clawed land from the earth only for it to be swindled in the 1920s by Hargrove ancestors using bogus liens. Harlan's own fight in the 1960s, boycotts, marches met with dogs and hoses, had forced partial concessions, but fear for his wife's safety led to the hidden trusts. I waited, his eyes told the gathering, for someone pure-hearted to carry the torch. That someone was Liana, whose simple act had rekindled the flame. Word spread like kudzu, igniting small victories. The mill workers, black and white alike, weary of the divide, walked out in solidarity, demanding audits of wages that revealed decades of discriminatory scales. Miss Etta's store became a hub, flyers detailing the land fraud circulating under counters. Even some hilltop families shamed by the light of exposure defected, old Mrs. Whitman donating seeds for community gardens on reclaimed plots. The Hargroves lawyered up, spinning tales of vandalism by agitators, but cracks showed. Tommy expelled from school for the bike incident, his father grilled by state investigators sniffing embezzlement. Liana's family gained ground, too. Mama promoted to supervisor, their shack's title cleared via a hurried county reversal. Harlan's surviving acres were deeded back, not just to him, but to a co-op for the Hollow, ensuring no single hand could clench it again. Yet resolution wasn't tidy. Scars lingered like the cabin's charred skeleton. Liana wrestled nightmares of fists and flames, her trust fractured, but therapy from a pro bono clinic, finally accessible, mended the fissures. She mentored younger kids, teaching history not from textbooks that whitewashed atrocities, but from lived truths, the Tulsa massacres echoing Eldridge's whispers, the redlining maps overlaying their streets. The town transformed subtly. The statue in the square toppled by anonymous hands, replaced by a plaque honoring sharecroppers. Integrated potlucks where recipes bridged divides. School curricula infused with voices long muted. Harlan passed that winter, peaceful in a bed not his own, his last days spent walking the fields with Liana, hands clasped in silent gratitude. His will named her steward, a legacy of land and lessons. The impact rippled outward, a stone skipped across still waters. National eyes turned, documentaries filmed in the Hollow, grants flowing for restoration. Liana, now 15, penned essays for scholarships, her words a beacon. Racism isn't a ghost. It's the foundation we stand on, and sometimes helping one soul cross a street means dismantling the whole damn house. She left for college on a full ride, but returned summers, building a center for youth activism, where stories like hers fueled fires against injustice nationwide. Eldridge Hollow, once a hollow indeed, filled with echoes of change, reminders that one girl's compassion could unearth empires of inequity. But what if that old man had never crossed your path? Would the town's lies have buried another generation? In the quiet nights, as cicadas sang their eternal chorus, Liana pondered. Kindness isn't weakness. It's the quiet revolution that topples thrones. And in Eldridge, the soil, once poisoned, began to heal, fertile again for justice if we dare to till it.